This is the 1 Million Lives podcast by Laerdal. Listen to healthcare professionals, healthcare educators, and survivors share their best practices and what they've learned from these experiences. At Laerdal, it's our goal to help save 1 million more lives every year by 2030. One life at a time.
I am currently here at the International Meeting for Simulation Healthcare, the IMSH 2024 in San Diego. I had my program laid out on beforehand, and I had marked out some sessions of particular interest. I also had a list of people I wanted to connect with, both for the informal chit-chat and networking, but perhaps more importantly because I do have some hobby horses when it comes to fields of interests, and here at IMSH, almost all of the key opinion leaders can be found walking and talking among the rest of us. This is an opportunity not to be missed, I think. Just yesterday, I had the great privilege of sitting in on a great pre-conference workshop with Dr. Paul Frampus and the team he brought from the Wiser Simulation Center and their collaboratives in Malaysia and Thailand. The workshop was on how to design really impactful and effective simulation scenarios. And this is one of those workshops that I wish for everyone who are or will be engaged in simulation to have access to. Because without a well-designed simulation scenario, it is really hard, perhaps even impossible, to arrive at the real value of the planned simulation session. I came away with some really good points to work on with regards to the future and how we work with simulation content here at Laerdal. Two other topics I will look out for during this IMSH are those who take a really good deep dive into educational methodology, and also, of course, the topic of artificial intelligence, AI. It is no secret that I did feel a little bit let down last year at the IMSH Research Summit, not by any means by the multi-year, well-versed meta-analysis that had been done, and also, of course, not by the great presentations that were given on the status of simulation as an educational method. But more, it seemed like we had come rather short still. The needle hasn't moved much, neither in healthcare education nor in simulation used in other healthcare facilities. And when it comes to AI, everything seems to be moving at warp speed, and I'm really curious to see what the status is in employing AI in healthcare simulation. So without further ado, I will get right out of the way and leave you with two interviews I did on these topics with two people I think are well placed to help us move forward with these areas. Dr. Janice Palaganas and Dr. Dave Rodgers. Enjoy.
Thanks for having me today, Michael. Excited to be with you. And I'm a professor at Massachusetts General Hospital Institute of Health Professions and a professor of health professions education. I was part of starting the Ph.D. for health professions education with a focus on simulation, which has been really amazing. And then we also offer a master's. I am the founding director of this new Center of Excellence in Healthcare Simulation Research. And in the past, I worked for the Center for Medical Simulation as their Director of Educational Innovation. I also was part of the team, the inaugural director of starting the accreditation program for SSH, as well as the certification program. And part of that work stemmed into our textbooks, defining excellence in healthcare simulation, and then also mastering simulation.
Wow. I know you from all kinds of stages. I've seen you on the main stages everywhere, and even the smaller rooms presenting.
Oh, I thought you meant stages of life.
No. These are
I was definitely a baby and have aged over time.
No. So this was, and you have given some tremendously good, I think, presentations over the last few years that I've seen you. Now, I wanted to dive in a little bit about this new Center of Excellence. Why do you think that was needed? And what are you hoping to accomplish with that?
Okay, so I could talk about healthcare simulation research every day. It's definitely my passion. I would say over time, all of the systematic reviews that I've done, and my team and I have just completed what's called an umbrella review, which is a systematic review of systematic reviews. And we've also just published the guidelines from the Research Summit last year. And I think it's not new news that we all know that the literature, the articles of research that exist right now is not enough to definitively inform or provide recommendations for how we should, most effectively use simulation, most effectively debrief. There's so much that still needs to be studied. And I think part of it, just like education in simulation, you are this great simulationist or a clinician, and some programs have an imperative to publish. Others will say, hey, we need you to do research, but people have not formally developed those skills. They haven't had formal training.
Right.
And I think our literature is a product of that lack of training. And so what this new center is going to do is we're going to have intensive workshops and as well as online courses to basically help us as simulationists improve our research skills.
Now, and I went to your webpage, and there's a lot of good information. I highly recommend. I put a link in the subnotes for the podcast episode. But I have to admit something. I was at the Research Summit last year, and many great topics, tremendous amount of work that had gone into those kind of
tremendous amount. I mean, it's 3 years. I had 3 teams, 3 years of work, same outcomes. We can't give you anything.
No, and that was sort of my takeaway. Was I felt my shoulders dropping while I listened more and more, and don't we know more?
Yeah,
was my thoughts. Don't we know more at this point?
Yeah,
maybe we don't. Enter your Center of Excellence, and I think you. When I read the webpage, you have some interesting perspectives. And of course, you talking about teaching and learning in itself would catch my interest as an educator. But even more when you sort of went to the neuroscience perspective of things.
Yeah.
Then you really sort of caught my interest. And I'm curious as to why those perspectives?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of what I've been doing is qualitative research.
Right.
And what I'm starting to find is now I want some actual evidence of what our bodies and our brains do with all of the different methods that we use, particularly stress, confidence levels with our students.
Yeah.
And I think just speculating that one method is better than the other is, I think we've matured as a field now where we can start packing in some evidence. And my hope is that the center will serve as a hub for people who are doing studies in this and, who can share and perhaps do multi-site studies together in the different cultures to see what works and what doesn't work. So I can give you an example because I think this is hard to understand sometimes. I did write an article in Clinical Sim and Nursing. It's called How Do You Learn? And it basically unpacks what I had observed from watching my son in a jazz piano lesson and how musicians teach, which is very different than the way we teach. And what I noticed was, or what had occurred to me was, why do we stand behind the mirror when our students go in to take care of the mannequin or in a case? When in the hospital setting, we never do that. We go in, unless, you've been working with a student for a long time, but for the most part, if it's a new student, you would go into the patient room with them and they would learn alongside you.
Definitely.
And that in itself sets up psychological safety without having to do this entire pre-briefing because you're along with them, you're a team going in and you're there to support. So why do we do it that way? So there's a lot of things that we've adopted along the way, thinking this is the right way to do it. Kim Layton and I did a study on debriefing. I believe it was a systematic review. And what we found was that there are, I can't remember the number of debriefing methods. I want to say there were 8 that we found. But if you look into the progenitors of each of these different methods of debriefing,
Right.
they all learned from mentors in North America. So essentially all of our debriefing methods come from North America.
Yep.
Do they truly work in different cultures? We don't know, because we've just been telling the world this is the best way to do it. So I think studying that is very important, not just, challenging the way we do things today and seeing if there are better ways. That's something that's interesting to me.
Let me test an idea with you.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking for a while that we're muddying the waters a bit. We are sort of mixing together the swim lanes, the teaching swim lane and the learning swim lane, to a degree where we point at the learner and saying, you need to take responsibility for your learning.
Yep.
And in a way, the teachers can hide behind that. And I'm curious as to why don't we do more almost like A/B testing of teaching? And if we come forward with something that really works, we are here with 4,200 people at IMSH. What do you think is the willingness to adopt what works in this community?
Wow, that's a great question and probably should be researched.
That's a very diplomatic and good answer. Yeah.
That is accepting change. And I think, I'm hoping that if we were to do this at the Center of Excellence, we could provide enough evidence that could help facilitate the change. Because I think people are not willing to change when there is no evidence behind it. But when you can show, here are the interesting things we found, maybe you should give it a try, that's different. Versus someone just saying it in a workshop session here, you should do it this way without evidence.
So what would success look like for the Center of Excellence?
I think success would look like growing our field to conduct more rigorous research.
Yes.
I think having mentorship pathways where people don't feel like they're doing it alone and have to Google everything to figure out how to do things, and essentially not doing it right because they're not thinking deeply on the methodology, or that they have somebody to guide them through their studies and to think deeply. I think that's the big thing, is it's not about getting the publication, it's about contributing to the field and making impact and building upon each other. So I would say success is growing the knowledge in general of how to do research in a rigorous way with thought that will deeply impact our field.
I think you're right. That's probably the big missing part right now. For me, at least, I come from the outside. I admit I'm part of the sort of the industry, but I also have an education background, and I'm missing, if we know what works, let's say we knew what worked, how do we then implement that in a strong way? Because I think implementation research, follow through, as much as breakthrough, is also probably needed.
Yes.
Anyway, this was terrific, Janice. I wish you all the best with the center.
Thank you.
And if we can be of any help and support, we will. But I'm looking forward to the results of this, the outcomes.
I am too. Hopefully there will be a research summit where we are saying more than the literature is not good.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you.
A topic that lurks or looms over all of us these days, it may seem, is artificial intelligence. And here at IMSH, it has been the topic in a few educational sessions, and we also have seen some examples among the exhibitors. As I walked around here at IMSH, I was fortunate enough to meet someone I've known for many years and who actually knows something about what AI might mean for us in the healthcare simulation space, namely Dave Rodgers. Dave and the team, they published an article recently about AI in the Journal for the Simulation and Healthcare Society. And I will put up a link to that in this podcast, just below the podcast, so you can check it up. But I was fortunate enough to have the chance to sit down with Dave for a few minutes. And Dave, great to see you again. It's been a long while.
Yes, it's always good to see you, Michael.
I think we've worked together on a couple of occasions with some programs, but what got me really curious this time, because I saw your name on the program that you were going to give a session. But before we dive into the details on your work on AI, why don't you introduce yourself to the wider audience?
Okay. My name's Dave Rodgers. I am in Bloomington, Indiana, here in the United States, where I'm the director of the Interprofessional Simulation Center. And we support the School of Medicine, the School of Nursing, as well as Indiana University Health here in Bloomington.
I'm curious, what got your interest going when it came to AI?
Well, in 2020, I guess it's 2022 now, late 2022, OpenAI, a company on the West Coast, came out with the ChatGPT program. And a couple of our simulation technologists started experimenting with it and showed me what they were doing. I thought, okay, this has a lot of potential. So we looked at it. We saw what it could do to help us in scenario creation. And we knew that nobody else had really done any research on this yet, primarily because it was so new. So we took the opportunity to go ahead and conduct a small research study showing what the potential was for ChatGPT to help the simulation technologists, as well as what the issues were they needed to watch for. And that resulted in the article that we had in Simulation Healthcare.
Interesting. What was the construct of the study? How did you set it up?
So we used ChatGPT to basically write two scenarios for us. We asked it questions. One of the things you have to do with ChatGPT is you ask it questions. And in a conversational manner, it comes back with answers. So we asked it questions to develop two scenarios. One was an adult cardiac arrest. The other was a pediatric asthma case. And we took the answers and copied them verbatim into a scenario template. Then we had 6 really well-developed simulation experts score it using a validated scoring tool for scenario creation and see how well it did. Now, during that, we didn't tell them these were not created by human beings, that this was an artificial intelligence created. And so as they went through it, they scored it in 6 different domains. And basically, if you added it all up and put it on a report card, it came out to about a B-,
wow,
which was pretty good.
Yeah.
And then when we revealed to them that this was actually an artificial intelligence created scenario, we got their input from that, and which was surprising because they really didn't think about that.
Now, I guess there were some nuances in that report card of a B-, something probably very good and something less good. Could you sort of elaborate on that?
Yeah, the good part of it was, where it really excelled at was creating the story for what was going on. It allowed us to create the conditions for what the patient was experiencing. We were very specific in who the audience was. In one audience, it was experienced emergency medicine providers. In the other, it was medical students and nursing students working together in a interprofessional education setting. And it scaled what they needed to do to their experience level and their knowledge level. So that was really nice. Some things that didn't do well on, the one area that everybody scored low on was describing the states of the scenario as it progressed through. It gives you a verbal response. And most scenario templates look at the states as individual blocks that here's the patient in this state, and when something happens, they move to a new state. And it almost works like a flow chart. And ChatGPT, and we used version 3.5, which was the free version, it was not able to give us the visually appealing algorithm or flowchart that you would typically see in a human-generated case. The other issue was it made some stuff up. It just it did complete fabrications on some areas of information that just did not exist. The most prolific of that was we asked ChatGPT to give us 10 citations in the literature that the debriefer could use as reference points during the debriefing. And so we had a total of 20 citations. 16 of them were completely fabricated. They did not exist. They call this in the literature hallucinations or confabulations. And it just, so it had problems with that. So we realized that while it helped us in other areas really need to be double checked and referenced. Also, looking at the specificity of the questions that you have to ask. You really need to be specific. In the one scenario, we asked for American Heart Association guidelines for guiding the care and the medication doses. Well, it did that. The problem was the guidelines were 10 years old that it ended up taking information from. It did not give us the current guidelines. So if we would have said something to, say, the 2020 guidelines as opposed to the 2010 guidelines, we would have gotten a more accurate answer there. So you really need to be specific in asking the questions.
Yeah, and that was actually going to be one of my key questions here, is sitting down with you and sort of around the medical accuracy, so to speak. Because I guess one of the potential advantages here is if someone do not work clinically anymore, and we know the halvation time on clinical work it's rapidly going down and new stuff comes in all the time. So I was curious as to the medical accuracy, but from what you're telling me, it was pretty good.
Yeah, the story it told made sense. Mm-hmm. There were things in it that if you knew the case, you look at it and said, yeah, okay, that's not right. And at one point in the cardiac arrest case, it gave conflicting information. I think it said that the patient was in VFib with flatline on the monitor, which makes no sense. It's completely nonsensical, and there's one of the hallucinations that it had. So, relying on an old quote that I think came out of politics, trust but verify. It gives you a good starting point, but it really requires double checking.
This is a special event episode of the 1 Million Lives podcast, coming to you from the 2024 IMSH conference in San Diego.
What could potential implications be of your findings and what you have seen so far when it comes to things like faculty development and supporting or co-piloting faculty in the future with AI?
I think looking at what we have right now we did use ChatGPT version 3.5. They do have a version 4.0 out, which is a pay version. It's a subscription version that does have a little more flexibility and is supposed to be a little more accurate. And we also did not look at any of the other AI programs that use the same technology that have come out from other entities, some related to big companies like Google and others that are freestanding. But I think this really gives us a chance to use another resource, and that's all it is. It's not going to be replacing anything. It's going to be another tool that we can use to go forward. And the simulation technologist will help there. For faculty that are involved in this, it could give them a little better understanding of what is required. One of the questions we actually asked it was, what mannequins would be best to conduct the scenario with? And it gave us it gave us a listing of mannequins, most of which were pretty accurate. A couple of them were a little bit of a stretch where they would have been used. But for an individual who doesn't know simulation as well, such as a content expert, as opposed to a simulation specialist, this might help them get an idea of going forward when they're trying to build simulation cases.
Very fascinating, and I guess it speaks to both effectiveness and efficiency potentially. So I'm curious now that you have this taste of it. What's next for you and your team in this area?
We're going to continue to explore how we can best use AI technology to assist us in this. I think there's a great deal of potential in this. We conducted a workshop on Monday at IMSH and had a very good response, some really good suggestions. A lot of people had a lot of fresh ideas about how they could integrate it into their practice. And again, it's just a tool. It's not going to replace anybody. When we first looked at it, one of our simulation technologists said, "Uh-oh, I'm out of a job." But it's not that. It's still going to require a human to interact with it, to ask the questions, to verify the information, to structure it in ways that will do best. So I think that's going to be good. One of the other areas that it appears to be very good at is changing context. So if you have an established scenario, you can just tell it, look at this scenario and make it for a different audience. And it goes in and just does that for you. Or you can turn an adult case into a pediatric case or vice versa. And so that will simplify a lot of areas where we already have scenarios developed and that we can change the setting rather easily.
So in your case, you used ChatGPT or AI to create scenarios. If we look ahead, what other domains or areas or topics or themes could you potentially have benefited from using AI in if you try to look into your crystal bulb for this?
Well, we're seeing some of that happen right now. A couple of different manufacturers are coming out with AI-assisted conversational capabilities in the simulators. Some of that is built into the simulators. There's one product out that's a freestanding product. But to be able to build a backstory and a history of that patient loaded into an AI program that a nurse or a medical student walking in a room can then engage in a genuine conversation without relying on somebody hitting buttons to have cues or to have a simulation technologist speak through the mannequin. You can have a very conversational activity. Anybody that has an existing bank of scenarios, and Laerdal is very emblematic of that with what's available through SimStore and other sources through there. But to be able to go back into that, develop the backstories. And I'm not just talking about how, I had started having chest pain at 2 hours ago, or my right side is leak, or here's my medication list. To go in even further and create a genuine story behind a patient. So if the nursing student, the physician, whoever interacts with them, they can engage in conversation, some of their home life, things like that. If they're in the process of starting an IV and they want to distract a patient, they can ask, do you have any pets at home? Said, yeah, I have a dog. What's his name? Fido. And you could actually create very, very rich conversations that are pretty much instantaneous that can bounce back and forth. So I think that is probably that's the low-hanging fruit that we see right now, is putting those kind of backstories in and creating more spontaneous conversations. Going down the road, I think there's also some capabilities to help us in the area of debriefing. And as you mentioned earlier, faculty development is another area. To be able to, for organizations that have a audio-video system that are recording the audio from the program, to be able to put that audio into a ChatGPT program or any other AI program and have it analyze the audio and have it look for things such as closed-loop communications, call-out, identification of leadership, look at the conversation that took place during the patient care, and give the briefer, the facilitator, extra information that they can go back into the debriefing with, similar to what the mannequins record and tell you, what was your chest compression fraction, CPR? What was your, when did you give a certain medication? When did the vital signs change? We have all that already in there, but to be able to engage the actual audio and potentially even get to the point of having a computer-generated score about what was the teamwork efficiency based on the audio, that would be a tremendous asset to giving the debriefer and the teams an objective look at what they did and giving them a score, similar to what we do with chest compression efficiency. The other area, and then looking down the road at faculty development, is being able to do the same thing with the debriefing. When I work with other simulation centers, I always encourage them, when you put your AV system in, put cameras and microphones in your debriefing rooms. That way you can record it. It's available to go back and do evaluations and coaching for the facilitators during the debriefing. We can engage an artificial intelligence the same way and have the AI analyze the debriefing and identify, was the facilitator more directive in their actions as opposed to asking more questions? What was the interactions like? What kind of questions did they ask? Did they ask questions or did they just talk? And be able to give them an ability to do some self-assessment with coaching from the AI, or to use a peer evaluator to help them coach through it using some subjective information coming from the AI.
I think this is highly visionary, Dave. And I mean, the way yes, we need to focus on the learning and the outcomes, but now you're sort of swinging it over and saying we also can potentially use it to improve our teaching or facilitating. And I think that is often overlooked when it comes to the tech side of the house. When we start talking about assessments and measurements and improvements, it's typically on the outcomes. But you actually saying it could potentially also help faculty development. I love the idea. Now, I'm putting you a bit on the spot here, but if you were to guess, with the current speed of development in this area, when do you think we can have something like this?
Oh, I would think it's going to happen pretty quickly. I think this is a highly competitive arena.
Yeah.
We're already seeing AI in just the last year or two being introduced into commercial simulation products. This is going to be a natural extension for anybody that uses a sophisticated audiovisual system. This would be, they've already got the core, they're already recording. And so some of that technology is already there. Now it's just a matter of the software that's needed to take the audio that's already there, interface it with the artificial intelligence and give meaningful feedback. So it's all software engineering. There's no hardware involved. And so I think that will really make the development cycle pretty streamlined.
And maybe it will even help the implementation cycle, because we know video to some degree is controversial for whatever reason. Maybe audio is less controversial. I don't know. Maybe it's worthwhile trying out.
Yeah, and I think the fact that it's a subjective measure. We're using something that doesn't have emotions, that doesn't who the person is doesn't matter. And so it gives you information that is just what it's interpreting. Again, there's probably limitations to it because of some of the accuracy of it. But I think, and this is an area that nobody's explored yet, and doing conversational analysis with AI, at least in healthcare simulation. And so I think this is a big potential area.
Well, I'm certainly going to look out for your next publication on this, Dave. This was, as always, very insightful. Thanks a lot for taking your valuable time here at the IMSH to have this brief chat. I always appreciate your insights and have fun for the rest of the conference.
Okay, thank you.
I hope all the 4,200 plus participants of the IMSH 2024 made it home uneventfully. I hope you enjoyed the great insights by these great people in the two interviews. A big thanks to both of them for so willingly sharing their knowledge here at the 1 Million Lives podcast. And also a big thank to you in the audience out there. I hope you found it interesting too. We have a lot of exciting guests lined up for the coming episodes. To ensure that you have direct access to the knowledge and insights of these thought leaders in healthcare and healthcare simulation, I suggest you click the subscribe button. And as always, if you have any input for us in the editorial board, please reach out using the email address podcast@laerdal.com. With that, I wish you all well and bye for now.
You have been listening to a 1 Million Lives podcast by Laerdal. You can find all our podcasts and access any bonus material on laerdal.com/podcast. The views, information, or opinions expressed are those of the guests and do not necessarily represent those of the institution they are affiliated with or of Laerdal Medical. If you have any suggestions for guests or topics we should cover, please send us a message on laerdal.com/podcast. We look forward to hearing from you.
Until the next time, goodbye from the Laerdal podcast team.